chapter. Chapter 9 is restoring a dynamic economy with jobs and opportunity for all.
Yes.
So the first section he's talking about growth and productivity. I don't have any notes here until it gets to the labor force growth and participation.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I have is talking about the labor force participation rate.
Yeah.
And the labor force partition rate took a big hit during COVID, obviously, and it's steadily been increasing back up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still lower than where it was in the 90s by a substantial margin. So it used to be around 67% in the 90s, and we're currently sitting at like 63%. So we have a 4% difference in our labor force participation rate.
Okay.
That's not good.
Is this amongst all adults? Like, what is this percentage taken out of? Do you know?
The labor force participation rate is people between the ages of 18 and 64 who are currently looking for work and can't. Currently looking for work.
Okay. And they're not fully employed?
No, that's the unemployment rate will be people who are... Wait, no, I'm sorry. This is incorrect. The labor force participation rate is everybody ages 18... Wait, what is it? Oh,
it's
no.
probably everyone.
No, I'm wrong.
Like everyone 18 and up, I assume. Because that's the only way it can be so low. And what Stiglitz specifically talks about is accommodating older workers.
Yeah.
Who are usually shuttled out because of ageism.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Labor force participation rate represents the number of people in the labor force as a percent of the civilian non-institutional population. So, yeah.
Okay.
The participation rate is the percentage of the population that is either working or actively looking for work. Okay.
So 63% is pretty low. He makes a few suggestions, including supporting mothers better to include more women who are starting families in the labor force.
Yep.
Which I totally agree with.
Oh, yeah.
Accommodating older workers. And he talks about needing a healthier population.
Yeah.
Which we've talked about earlier in this book as having an unhealthy population being an effect of the economic inequality and inability to find opportunity.
Definitely.
In the country. Here he's talking about it also as a cause.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I have one more note on the labor force participation rate with regards to women having trouble entering the labor force because of childcare.
Sure.
When we look at the ages of 24 to 55, men have a labor force participation rate of 90%, 24-55.
Wow.
Women, 77. It's a massive disparity.
Yeah.
And that's directly because of,
the difficulty.
When we go to 16 plus, it's at 68 for men, 57 for women for 16 plus. But for the prime working age, 24-55, 90% men, 77% women.
Okay. I don't think he really talks about, well, he does talk about a few family-friendly policies here, greater flexibility of hours, more support for childcare, better family leave policies, but they're all generic.
They're all generic. I think Biden has pushed for some really good daycare policies.
Yes.
Capping the cost of daycare to 7% of your income, I think, is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
There's some cases where it's actually cheaper for a woman not to go to work because childcare will exceed her salary.
That's insane.
Yeah. It's cheaper for a woman to stay home and work than actually go get a job because of childcare being so expensive.
Yeah.
So having childcare capped at 7% of your income, I think, is a pretty good idea.
Yeah. This is something I read an article a few weeks back about how birth rates amongst more educated women have actually been rising since COVID because more companies are allowing for more flexible work arrangements.
That's amazing.
And so if women can stay at home while they do their work and also take care of their kid, they're totally fine.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a great product of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's really good. Then the next thing I have is talking about monopolies and their incentive to grow economic productivity. So I absolutely agree that we need to curb market power to address the productivity crisis and also increase our infrastructure spending. Biden's passing of the infrastructure bill last year, we'll see what the effects of that over the coming decade. I mean, we're lucky we got something like that passed. I'm sure it's going to do a lot of good. And we'll see what we're able to return on that. But how do we tackle the market power is a massive conversation that he doesn't really get at.
No.
He just says we need to tackle it.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, how do we tackle it?
Yeah. And I guess you can make you can draw the connection between how reducing market power will increase productivity, but I feel like he doesn't explicitly say that.
Well, he did that in chapter 3.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So
I guess in that case, I just feel like this section was kind of unnecessary.
I agree.
Like it didn't really add anything.
I don't think it added anything. And I think that kind of is going to happen a little bit going forward. Too.
Yeah, exactly. So the last section here is creating a learning society, which again, he's touched on before, but it's like we should make large public investments in research. Something that he mentioned with the Trump tax cuts is that they reduced that public investment, deferred it to hopefully something the private sector would do. Stiglitz says that's a bad idea because even if the private sector won't invest as much as we need,
right? Because
they'll only invest as profit seeking motives rather than for knowledge seeking motives.
Right. Deepen the moat, expand the moat.
Yes.
As we talked about, make it harder for other people to enter. That's where they're going to research.
Exactly. And otherwise, they're incentivized to hoard their knowledge, to hide it, to not share it, and that really limits our society's ability to move forward.
Exactly. They're going to hide this great research behind closed doors, and it's going to limit what we're going to be able to really get out of it. Yeah. And that's why public investment in research and development is so necessary. And the new tax law is taxing, or Trump's tax law, it was taxing research universities for the first time, while it was giving tax breaks to real estate speculators. So this is a good example of how the Trump tax cut kind of frames its belief in the country's goals and what it wants the country to look like. Do you want it to be a land for renters, or do you want it to be a land for creators?
Yes.
And the Trump tax policy is a policy for and by renters. Yeah.
Sure.
So
the other thing I have here is that he mentions a need for open borders as far as knowledge.
Yeah.
So that we can help the world increase and the world can help us.
Absolutely.
I don't have to spend much time on that.
No, I totally agree with all that stuff. Publicly fund the research, keep the country open from people from abroad and new ideas. And I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And we have to increase taxes on corporations and spend more money on U.S. infrastructure. And it's interesting because I basically summarized this section as we need to increase taxes on corporations, spend more money on U.S. infrastructure, and invest in technology and science. Well, Biden did all of that. Biden increased the taxes on corporations by implementing the 15% minimum corporate tax rate for any corporation having profits to shareholders of above $1 billion. We passed an infrastructure bill where we're spending more money on infrastructure than we have since Eisenhower. And we passed the CHIPS Act where we're investing in technology and science at a rate we've never done. Biden did the 3 things.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
That's pretty damn nice.
It's pretty damn nice. So it's something. But now we talk about this a lot with the book. We've transitioned from an agricultural society to a manufacturing society. What we're doing now is we're transitioning from a manufacturing society into a serviced economy, into a post-industrial world.
Yes.
And somebody is driving the car. Whether it's the government, whether it's Elon Musk, somebody's driving it. The people need somebody who is responsible to us driving it. We need somebody who is going to steer the car in the best direction for the people driving the car, not some private guy. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's what he gets into in the next chapter, the next section.
Yeah. The government. We need the government to have a heavy hand in this transition. So he talks about 2 things I have here: active labor market policies.
Absolutely.
And industrial policy. So active labor market policies, he says they help retrain individuals for new jobs, help them find new employment. I also interpret this as reducing unemployment, as supporting people through unemployment, or what he will mention later, I guess we'll get to this, is like providing government jobs for them. Yeah,
a federal jobs guarantee, which I'm a huge supporter of.
Yes, I love that.
If someone wants a job, give them a job. I love that idea.
Totally. And then industrial policy, which is basically laying out certain carrots or sticks. For carrots as in tax breaks, or incentive, sticks as in excess taxes. One good example he talks about is tax on carbon emissions.
Yeah.
To influence the direction that these companies go in terms of what they're producing, how they're interacting with their consumers, and how they're employing people.
And he notes that this industrial policy needs to be focused around places, not just people.
Yes.
Because we have places in this country where people have roots. They don't want to lose community bonds. We've learned that social bonds and community involvement is one of the largest predictors of a long and happy life. We don't want to lose that. And I think the CHIPS Act is good with that. I think it encourages a lot of production and investment, even in rural places around Ohio, you know?
Especially in rural places.
Rural places in Ohio.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really great aspect of that. I think that is a spatially cognizant industrial policy move. And I was really happy to see that. He gave the example of Manchester in the United Kingdom that was able to transition from a textile hub to an education center. And it was through government intervention that it was able to accomplish that transition. And that's what we're going to have to do going forward.
Yes. It's a very specific antidote to like the industrial jobs that were lost to globalization.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to bring it back to Gary.
Yeah.
We need an industrial policy that's going to tell the people of Gary that we're coming to help.
Yeah.
We're not going to ask you to go move to San Francisco where houses are super expensive and cause more problems to the housing crisis. We're going to say, stay where you are. We're coming to get you.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Okay. Next up, I have social protection.
Yeah.
Being the next big thing. So Stiglitz says there are gaps in our social insurance. It's not good enough and we need to fix it. I'm very much on board with all of this.
Definitely.
He says we need to reform our unemployment insurance with better payments, which means bigger payments for longer periods and more people covered. Right now, our unemployment insurance plan looks like you can be unemployed for 6 months and get payments. For those 6 months, you get paid half of what you were making on a weekly basis before you lost your job. I don't remember. Does Stiglitz talk about like number wise what he wants?
No. No. He does say so. He doesn't say what does he say?
He does say talk about income contingent loans.
Yes, I don't like these at all.
No,
I think they're terrible.
Okay, talk to me.
So one of the things he talks about is possibly giving the long-term unemployed the ability to borrow against their future earnings to support their family in the moment. I mean, to me, this is what I wrote. When I read this is what I wrote. This seems like an absolutely awful idea. Wait, what did I say this? Even with completely low interest rates, maybe. So if they have totally low interest rates, maybe. But this may stick people with low skills and low incomes with higher income tax for the rest of their life. And I say with a higher income tax because basically this is what this is. That's how I view it. I view that this is going to be like, okay, you were unemployed for this period of time. That's cool. Now you have a 2% higher income tax than anybody else because you borrowed against your earnings and now you have to pay back that loan. You know what I mean?
So you just think
I don't think Americans are financially literate enough to not abuse that system terribly.
How would they abuse it?
By using that to either stay unemployed for too long, thinking that they'll be able to pay it back no problem.
Okay.
Or, I mean, that's how they would abuse it.
Okay. Do you have another idea for how to handle long-term unemployment? Is it just we need more funding so that we can extend this insurance past the 6-month period that it currently is at?
I think the initial unemployment that you get should be higher than 50%, and then it tapers off as it goes on. So it goes down from like 50 or from 70 to 60 to 50 to 40 and then goes away maybe for like a year. But I like his other proposal where he's talking about paying people to go back to work, where the government will give you a sign-on bonus if you go get a job to encourage people back into the labor market. Because he says that individuals get an unrealistic expectation of what they should get from their next job after they're laid off. They don't want to take a lower salary, or they think that they should get a salary increase after they've had more experience. But the federal government giving a signing bonus to, if you go get a job, will encourage people to get out there more, which I think would alleviate a lot of long-term unemployment.
Okay. Yeah.
You know?
I like that.
Yeah. But also, the real answer for unemployment is federal jobs guarantee, which doesn't include here.
No,
but
that'll
it
be
includes
the next
later.
chapter.
Yeah. But
We'll
that's...
definitely talk about that.
Yeah. Then he has the other solution.
Which is...
The UBI.
Yes.
The UBI, the Universal Basic Income.
Well, it was interesting because he talks about UBI. He gives a lot of information about it. So Universal Basic Income is a financial stipend for everyone. You don't need to work a job. There are no requirements. You just get paid a certain amount of money every month or every 2 weeks or whatever. He talks about good aspects, what supporters talk about, which is like it's going to dampen the negative effects of an economy that's trending towards automation, which is more applicable now than ever with
Definitely.
how much AI is growing. It would increase equality because it would redistribute money via taxes, of course. It would provide a backstop for people who fail to get jobs. It would mean that we really don't need this unemployment insurance. UBI would be...
Yeah, it would. He's saying it could replace a lot of social insurance programs that we currently have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But then so it's funny because he takes another side of the argument. He says, I don't believe simply providing income is the right approach. For most people, work is an important part of life. And I really disagree with this point.
It's interesting because I really agree with that point.
Okay, I don't disagree that work is an important part of life. What I disagree with is the idea that UBI will stop people from working. Like you've talked to me several times about how people work not just to live.
Right.
And what he's proposing is we'd be okay with shortening the work week. What I'm saying is I don't think UBI will make it so that people don't work. Like I feel like that's almost clear in his point.
And UBI doesn't make people not work. It
exactly.
doesn't. I know that. Yeah.
He says for most people work is an important part of life. If that's true, they're going to keep working nonetheless.
No, and we can see UBI experiments in Canada and Finland that resulted in higher employment rates than places that didn't have UBI.
Yes.
So we know that UBI is not taking people out of the labor market.
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
But I don't think UBI. I don't think UBI. I just don't think UBI is the answer to all of our. Like I don't like the idea of replacing our social insurance programs with UBI. That's kind of my main thing against it. I'm not like totally against it, but like I wouldn't want to replace food stamps with UBI. I wouldn't want to replace housing assistance with UBI because I think that rent seekers will be able to abuse that money much easier than they would be able to abuse food stamps. Do you know what I mean by that? Like it would be yeah. A rent seeker will see a UBI and be like, oh, I just know you got a $2,000 raise from the government. Well, guess what? You need housing to live. I'm increasing my rent. So now, or same thing with pharmaceuticals, they're going to increase their rent or same thing with whatever. Because it's more money that can just be sucked out. And I don't think there's consumer protections to protect people from stuff like that. And that's my issue with UBI. I think it leaves too much up to the market. It tells people, okay, you just need access to the market and then you're going to be fine. So here's all the access you need. But the market's the problem. It's not access to the market.
I wonder because that's kind of like UBI will drive inflation.
Yeah, totally.
But I've read that it doesn't. That in experiments like the ones in Canada, like that you're mentioning, it doesn't end up doing that. And I think it's because you're not actually adding any money into the economy. You're just redistributing it. And so I had the same idea that I would expect it to inflate prices of basic need goods like food and housing. And I feel stupid for not being able to give you a better reason of why it's not. All I do remember is reading that it doesn't drive inflation.
Okay.
So you can call bullshit on me, but hopefully maybe we could look into this later.
We'll look into that offline.
Can confirm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it does sound cool. It sounds awesome.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'll just emphasize that with AI, like where AI is going, it could increase human productivity by so many times. I don't want to pretend that I'm deep into the science of the papers here of how much it could do that, but it will really ramp up our productivity output.
Totally.
But it will also almost certainly, like in a lot of cases, reduce the number of workers that are needed. So UBI to me seems really fitting for this current moment.
I understand.
Yeah. Okay, so next section is decent jobs with good working conditions. He talks about ensuring full employment, which he, largely here, it's just a discussion of the problem rather than the solution. And I still think that's because he's going to get to the solution later. But I specifically wrote down, he doesn't say how to ensure full employment in this section.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about how to, he just kind of talks about how we don't have full employment currently, how we didn't have full employment after the 2008 recession, and how we should have had better fiscal policy to ensure that we did. He also talks about how not having full employment leads to poor political moments, and that's what it makes people open to demagogues who will target migrants, for fear that they'll take their jobs. And then people don't trust economists who tell them that all their job losses to globalization will eventually be replaced with better jobs. They don't trust any of that, because the job is the most important thing that you have. It's how you live. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And anything that's going to threaten that is going to be able to be abused by demagogues for sure.
Yes.
Totally. And I think so. Then it gets into this, that we need to recognize a new right in America, the right to a job.
Yeah.
The government should be in the business of being the boss of last resort.
Mm-hmm.
They should be the boss of last resort. There was an example he cited in India where they've been successful by giving all rural citizens who wanted a job for 100 days by doing construction work. And if a poor nation like India can afford it, so can we. You know, and what's going to be great about an American federal jobs guarantee is we can have these jobs compete with private sector jobs, and the private sector jobs will have to improve to get people out of the public sector jobs.
Yeah. This is where I wonder about specifics of that point, because if, say, you want public sector jobs to fill in for construction, development, how much management do you need? How much infrastructure do you need to build up in place to enable that? So I would just be curious.
What's the long-term cost of do you have to have a manager around every house district in the country that's going to be prepared to hire?
Yes.
Is that how that works? I don't know.
Probably multiple.
Right.
Because you also need managers at each site, and there are even if there are some amount of jobs that can go to unskilled labor, there are skilled, knowledgeable people that you almost certainly do need managing those positions.
Yeah.
So it gets harder when you get into the specifics. But the idea sounds great.
Yeah, I think obviously the idea sounds great. I think that its implementation isn't as difficult as it seems. But it's been a fight for a long time to have a federal jobs guarantee. It's been a fight for a long time. The New Deal did something similar with the civilian, the CCC, the Civilian Something Corps.
Okay.
And I would like to see something similar with a Civilian Climate Corps, where we can have an aspect of the U.S. government that is always going to be able to hire people for the sake of tackling climate change. Currently, right now, where we're at in the United States with being at full employment, maybe we don't need this type of jobs program, but in the future, definitely.
Well, I think something that allocated an amount of the budget and got the money via taxes to create or to enable full employment via the government, and then have some elastic plan so that money, if it didn't need to be used, could be diverted back into existing government programs.
Yeah, that's great.
That makes sense.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's perfect sense.
Okay, so he also says, so in the next section, or he mentions a bunch of these other things that we've already touched on as far as changes in our fiscal policy, that we should tax carbon emissions, we should invest in infrastructure, we should research investment, we should the one other thing that we haven't talked about yet is that we should create a bank.
Oh yes,
for all of this,
the infrastructure bank.
Yes.
Which I'm a huge supporter of creating an infrastructure bank.
I like that as well. It means that the government can't be exploited by private financial institutions and instead will have its own financial system to fund all these projects.
In the beginning of the Biden administration, Joe Manchin, who was a senator from West Virginia, he's probably the most conservative Democrat in the Democratic caucus in the Senate, was in support of an infrastructure bank. And I was so excited.
Yeah.
Didn't happen. But I was very excited that he was in support of that at the time. All right. Next thing is talking about opportunity and social justice. So currently, a fifth of children in this country grow up in poverty. These kids will obviously not be able to have the same type of opportunities that we had, obviously. Social justice needs to be a goal of the United States government. And one aspect of addressing this is, so there's two aspects. The first one we're going to talk about is pre-distribution income. Now, what is pre-distribution income? That is the distribution of market income. That is before the government gets involved. And how can we do this? And why would we want to do this? First, it lessens the burden of redistribution, which I think is a desirable goal. And then we need to increase the minimum wage. And then for post-distribution stuff, I think we should double the earned income tax credit and reinstate the child tax credit as created by the American Rescue Plan Act. You know, and these are things that will encourage family development, encourage, make it easier for people to live off the job that they have. And the child tax credit thing was one of the best things to ever happen in this country in the last 50 years. It's a shame it wasn't reinstated.
You know what's really interesting is the Trump tax cuts increased the child tax credit.
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
Doubled it. And then this Biden American Rescue Plan Act increased it by another 1,000.
Just crazy.
Yeah.
It was also different because the child tax credit, the way that it was working under Biden was a monthly payment, where with Trump's child tax credit, it just showed up in your tax return. Where it was like Biden, you got a check every day, every month in the mail. Where Trump, it was like a result of your tax return, which is it's a philosophical difference. Because it's not just a tax credit anymore. Now it's like a social program.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
You know, having the money one time every year is different from seeing it in your mailbox every month.
Yeah.
You know?
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So he also talks about how our financial system is completely structured around inequity, and how the bottom pay higher interest when they take loans out and then get low interest when they're put their money back in the bank. Honestly, this is like on track with a bank's incentives. You know, this isn't banks being bad for being bad sake. This is what a bank would do. They wouldn't give money to somebody who they don't think is going to be able to pay it back, right? Yeah. So it's hard for me to say like what the solution is to that.
I also don't know.
Like he never says what's even the proposed solution possibly to that.
Does he talk about like establishing the national bank for people?
Oh yes,
in that case?
He does talk about that. I feel like he talked about that previously, though. I don't think he talked about it in this chapter. I don't remember.
It might not be. I honestly don't know. I feel like either I didn't take notes on this or you jumped to somewhere that I haven't found in my notes.
Oh no.
It's all right.
No, it's all right.
Yeah. What I have for this section.
What do you have next?
So he talks about increasing the minimum wage.
Yep.
Providing an earned income tax credit.
Love that.
Which I do love. Weirdly enough, something that Trump also campaigned on increasing in his Tax Cuts Act, but it didn't end up coming to fruition.
I wonder why.
I don't know why. You think he was just lying about it?
Because Republicans barely supported the earned income tax credit when it was implemented.
Okay.
So why would they do it now? You know what I mean?
And so an earned income tax credit is supposed to be exactly opposed to rent seeking. It's like this is a tax credit you get from getting paid for work that you do rather than income you get from
it's a great way to look
ownership.
At it. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a specific tax credit you get for doing labor.
Yes. Okay, those are the two I have. Then it talks about the role of intergenerational transmission of advantage and disadvantage.
Yes, exactly.
So the biggest thing he talks about here is this is about beefing up education. It's about giving teachers better salaries, higher salaries, and better working conditions, which can include smaller class sizes. Hugely on board for this.
Yep.
I was reminded of a podcast that I listened to recently talking about China, talking about government workers in China, and how government work is some of the most prestigious jobs that exist in China.
Wow.
That seems like a norm shift that is hugely important.
Yeah.
For us.
I totally agree.
Right now, the prestigious jobs are, sure, you can say lawyer, but lawyers might be the people who are specifically helping the rent seekers. But you have like bankers as prestigious jobs. Doctors, sure, and other ones. But consultants, yes. The highest money-making jobs are the ones that are most practiced at exploiting the poor and redirecting it to the rich.
Yeah.
And so to pay teachers more could start to transition that.
Because I've said so many times here, it's like, and so is he, so many young, talented, amazingly bright people get sucked into the rent-seeking world.
Yeah.
And if we could just take out a portion of those and get them into teaching or get them into the public sector, it could be a totally different situation.
Totally.
You know, and we're not going to get those high-quality, top-tier candidates if we pay them like garbage.
Yeah. Exactly. We just need, there does need to be a narrative shift around this. And I wonder if part of that comes in like media portrayals as well.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They're being a teacher is not glamorized.
No. So the next thing he talks about is racial and gender discrimination.
Yep.
So while the social consequences are obvious, it also affects our economic vitality, as those who suffer from discrimination will never be able to live up to their potential. And he says this one other time in here, but our greatest resource is being wasted when that happens. And our greatest resource is the ambition and intelligence of our citizenry. That is our best resource as a country. And when people face discrimination, and these fantastically talented people don't get to live up to what they could be able to do, we all lose out.
Yeah.
You know? I actually wrote down the Supreme Court decision that killed the repeal of the Voting Rights Act of 2013 here, because he talks about it again.
Okay.
So it was Shelby County versus Holder. And it was a landmark decision of the Supreme Court of the United States regarding the constitutionality of two provisions of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. Section 5 requires certain states and local governments to obtain federal pre-clearance before implementing any changes to their voting laws. And Section 4B contains the coverage formula that determines which jurisdictions are subject to pre-clearance based on their histories of discrimination in voting. So this is what made it really easy to change these voting laws. The repeal of this. Okay. And this is another aspect of institutional discrimination. Yes. Not just personal discrimination, but the way the institutions are being designed to be discriminatory.
Sure. That makes sense.
You know, and that's what he says next. He says that our laws and our institutions are caked with this racism. Yeah. And we need another Civil Rights Act in order to start taking it off. Because right now it's just... It's completely...
It's still buried in it. Yeah, I see that. So what he says to do is he mentions affirmative action.
Yep.
He
says... Which is going to be killed.
Yeah.
There's a Supreme Court case right now that is basically going to rule that colleges and universities shouldn't be allowed or won't be allowed to ask the race of applicants, completely killing affirmative action.
See, I will say, I think doing affirmative action as a place-based policy rather than race-based might be preferable. But I don't know.
Listen, obviously, I would like a multivariate affirmative action policy where you're accounting income, race, and where you're from. But if you're not even going to take race into account, that really sucks.
Yeah. Because race would definitely be the
strongest predictor.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, that's going to be the strongest predictor. So it sucks that that's going to be taken out and affirmative action is going to be dead in America. I can't even believe that. You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, besides that, he doesn't really... He says we need to increase access to education, nutrition, and health. But he doesn't really give a way to do so.
I think he goes into that later, a little bit, right?
A little bit.
But it's he has no way to solve racism, which I don't blame him for. But, you know, he says we need a new Civil Rights Act. Well, what should be in that Civil Rights Act?
Mm-hmm.
More voting rights, sure. More health and nutrition assistance, I agree. You know, but it's a hard problem to solve, you know, and his ambiguity on that emphasizes that, I think, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He also talks about that the burden that the future generations are going to be saddled with. And he specifically emphasizes the 2017 tax bill as a burden because it's not pursuing the necessary investments that are going to deprive future growth. We're not investing in the things like infrastructure in the 2017 tax bill. We're not investing in superior technological advancements and research, you know, and we're going back on globalization and, you know, the way that we're going to be increasing our labor rates.
Yeah.
So
it's also increasing the deficit that will be happening each year, which is obviously going to be increasing the national debt. Yeah.
You know, and our planet is in existential danger. And the fact that it was completely ignored by the 2017 tax cut and the entire Republican administration for 4 years, totally ignored. Mm-hmm. You know, that puts a pretty big burden on future generations, I'll say.
Yeah. It's not great.
Not great. Not a great time to be growing up.
No. And then the last thing that he talks about in the chapter is taxation. And he's like, obviously, to fund these policies, like to have a more powerful government that can exist or kind of compete more with the private sector in a way, we need to tax more. One thing he says is returns to land, which is like rent, should be taxed much higher.
Yeah.
Right now, I think it's taxed around the 22% mark. Mm-hmm. He quoted someone who said it would be completely feasible. I should find this quote.
He said something about being 100.
Tax it at 100%, which I wonder about. Like, how would that work?
I have no idea. I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
You're gonna tax all revenue based off land holdings by 100%, and there's no incentive to tax than to buy land or to develop land. There's no incentive to do so.
Well, it would just be that land would be lived on by the owners. Like that would be.
What about commercial buildings?
That's the thing. What about currently owned buildings? Well, commercial buildings could still be owned by companies.
The companies that harbor them?
Yeah.
That would just all right. Well.
Yeah, but then it's like, what about skyscrapers? Like there aren't enough people.
And every building needs to now develop their own building. Every company now needs to build their own building. There can't you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it would just reduce incentives too much on development, which is still necessary.
Yeah. So I mean, have it be 40%. Have it tax more than labor.
Yes.
Obviously. Should it be 100%? No, not 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. And then he talks about tax and capital gains. Capital gains taxes should be double what the labor taxes are.
Yeah.
Obviously, the fact that capital gains taxes are taxes you pay on money you make in the stock market through your investments. Obviously, those should be taxed double what your labor is. You know, because it's rent seeking, and you know, so I don't agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trump actually campaigned on getting rid of capital gains taxes.
Really?
In 2016. Obviously, didn't talk about that once he got elected.
Yeah, capital gains is really just like, it's just playing money games.
It's gross.
In the market. And I mean, I guess you could say it's gross, but also, I mean, a bunch of people do benefit off of it, but I would say the average person benefits by putting their money in the market and just letting it grow over a long time.
Well, when I say it's gross, I say it's gross that it's taxed lower than labor.
Oh,
that's what I mean by it's gross. I don't think the action is gross. I think that part is gross.
Okay.
The fact that it's taxed lower than labor is like, you really think that we want an economy and a government that's going to incentivize people to sit at their laptop day trading on E-Trade more than going and being a firefighter?
Yeah.
Are we going to say that that's more valuable than the latter? No.
Exactly.
You know, so I don't agree with any of the capital gains being different for labor at all.
And it's interesting because the argument for like lowering capital gains taxes is it'll increase investment in the economy. But the thing is, the money that is invested in these companies, often it's just waiting to be ping-ponged around to other companies on the exchange.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not actually going towards any production.
No, it's not going to. And that's like the real fundamental cause of it. That's like the fundamental theory here. America has become a finance hub.
Mm-hmm.
We have aged into financialization.
Yeah.
And we don't make things, we're not producing things,
mm-hmm.
and that needs to change. We need to encourage companies and in some way force companies to start investing in tangibles rather than the fugazis.
Yeah. I mean, not even, I feel like tangibles might be a little misleading because I think about research, for example. Which,
research isn't technically, I mean...
like production of knowledge. Yeah. Just as important.
Well, when I say that, but that's still, research falls into investing in tangible because you're hiring someone to research.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Sure.